Welcome, Adrian. Thank you. I think you've got everything. Settle in, enjoy. We'll see you again soon. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, before we jump into the panel, I'm just going to do just a really brief opening around the research that we've done, and then we'll dive a little deeper. But it's a pleasure to be the first breakout session for Intersekt. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As introduced, my name is Carl. I lead the business for Stripe here in Australia, New Zealand. And I'd first like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, we've been at this Stripe thing now globally for well over a decade. Last month, we celebrated our 9th year in market here in Australia, and what we've learned over that period of time is that actually Australia is one of the fastest growing regions for Stripe globally. We can use that as a proxy to suggest that Australian businesses are very much leaning into the digital opportunity. Now, what that has resulted in is we now have over 500,000 businesses building with Stripe here in Australia. We're processing tens of millions of transactions on their behalf every single month. But one of the things that we find most important about our role in partnering with Australian business is to make these businesses the most globally competitive digital businesses on the planet. And so in order to get a better understanding of what that means, we're very proud to partner with the University of Sydney in doing some research surveying over 1,000 businesses here in Australia to get an understanding of how they're looking at the digital opportunity. What does digital payments mean for Australian business, both from a challenge and an opportunity and a business growth perspective? And so I'll go through a few summarised findings now over the next few minutes, and then we'll dive a little deeper with the panellists. So this first one, I think, is quite exciting, right? Because in previous research that we've done, and also the anecdotal evidence that we've collected in working with businesses at a global level, we know that digital payment methods matter in the success of business and in driving business growth. We know that consumers will abandon a purchase up to 80% of the time if their favourite or most trusted payment method is not available. And so to know that almost 50% of businesses in Australia are focused on adding new digital payment methods in their business over the next 12 months is really exciting, because it means that we're leaning into that growth opportunity. We also know, though, that there's a long way to go, because in some research we did earlier this year, and if we use an example of, for instance, digital wallets, so Apple Pay, Google Pay, we know that only 11% of e-commerce sites in this part of the world currently support those digital checkout mediums. So there's a huge growth opportunity, and it's great to see that businesses are continuing to invest. Now, the why they're investing is pretty interesting, right? So we've got 3 call-outs here. I think the first one around just being competitive, staying with the rising tide is certainly relevant. I think the other 2, though, are far more spiky with respect to their response, right? So the first is 84% around customer experience. Not only customer experience, though, because we know over 80% of them are focused on leveraging this medium to drive direct business growth. And then 74% looking to expand into new markets. Now, we actually have done some more research. We're doing lots of research at the moment. And in the digital trade report that we just released, we found that 66% of businesses here in Australia are focused on entering a new global market in the next 2 years. 50% of them suggest that it's easier now than it ever has been to do that. And 68% of consumers suggest that they are completely comfortable transacting cross-border. So knowing that more than 2/3 of businesses are now focused on leveraging this to enter new markets, again, correlates really, really well holistically with what we're seeing in the market. Now, this is pretty interesting, right? So we're talking about the concept of late payments, and when we generally talk to businesses, the concept of late payments, and in particular the impact to cash flow, tends to be far more concentrated in small to medium businesses. And we know that our partnership with Xero has suggested that if you offer digital payments capability, like a pay button on a digital invoice, small businesses will get paid 2 times faster, and we know that has a direct impact on their cash flow. But this research is suggesting that late payments is impacting everyone, no matter about business size. So this macroeconomic challenge that we're facing at the moment, where we're being told by our customers that both consumers and business partners are holding on to money longer because they're trying to manage their cash flow before paying their partners, is obviously having a downstream effect on all business. So leaning into those opportunities right now to optimize and offer digital payment opportunities that are low friction are going to offer a degree of offset against the macroeconomic conditions. Those things we can't control, we can control the digital payment experience, and so that's something that we're very heavily focused on at the moment with our customers at Stripe. This one's really interesting. We've highlighted the 23% around reducing operational costs, but I think the thing that really excites me about this slide is that most businesses are now seeing digital payments not as purely a cost to business, but rather as a top-line revenue growth opportunity. We know that payments optimization drives revenue growth. We know that there are some pretty incredible innovations in digital payment methods to drive up to 10% incremental revenue growth at the top line. And so this is just a really good reflection of seeing that businesses are leaning into this and knowing that digital payments is not just about meeting the status quo, it's not just about being the same as everybody else, but actually it's an opportunity to fundamentally drive growth even in an economic down cycle. This one isn't that surprising to us at Stripe. I think I have probably at least 1 to 2 conversations a day with customers looking to innovate in the mobile payment experience space, in particular around the concept of tap to pay. And so we're very proud to be able to offer both tap to pay on Apple and Android to allow organisations to fundamentally transform the way that they take payments in the physical world on mobile devices without the need for additional hardware. Now, we're seeing some pretty cool use cases here. They do tend to start with edge use cases like queue busting, but we are seeing some organisations really lean into this concept of saying, how do we just make the payments experience completely no friction? How do we start conducting the transaction at the product? How do we stop having the need for consumers to line up at a payments place versus letting the payment happen at the product? So quite an interesting spike here because there are a range of different questions asked, and even artificial intelligence, machine learning, which at the moment is very high in the hype cycle, was part of this survey, and yet tap to pay on mobile devices absolutely leading with respect to a trend that businesses are leaning into and are excited about investing in. This is a really hard slide for me as someone from New South Wales, but it's also really fortuitous that we're having Intersekt in Melbourne. But it's good to see that businesses here in Victoria are leading with respect to digital wallet adoption, but also the way that businesses are looking at how they need to be meeting consumers in the way that they want to pay. We know from RBA statistics that when it comes to contactless-based payments, that digital wallets, so paying with your phone at a payment terminal, is now almost the predominant method. It's upwards of 40% of transaction volume now in person for contactless is on a digital wallet, and it's great to see that Victorian businesses are leading here, only slightly ahead of New South Wales, which I would like to call out. But generally speaking, this is a reflection of the fact that here in Australia, we are quite a modern digital payments nation, especially if you travel to other countries, you'll see just how frictionless digital wallet payments are here in Australia compared to other nations. We still have a long way to go, but this is calling out that businesses are looking at trying to work out how they leverage these kind of payment methods and the habitual nature of the way that Australians are paying for goods and services. But it's not all upside. As the digital landscape grows, so does the attack surface used by bad actors. Now, with respect to what are the top concerns that are associated with this trend, you can see that there's a tremendous spike on frauds and scams. Now, the challenge with this is that's not all the same, right? So fraud generally is growing at about the same rate as digital payments is, and the cost of fraud from a transaction perspective has remained relatively static for a fair amount of time, suggesting that whilst fraud is a challenge, it is proportionally growing in alignment with the opportunity. That is not the case for scams, as many of you would know. Scams is an order of magnitude higher as a threat and an economic impact to business and the Australian economy than fraud. At the moment, about 6x larger than fraud alone, right? So we know that businesses are concerned about this. It's great to see that there's continued investment from government and commercial in trying to address this, but it is absolutely the number one thing that businesses are concerned about with respect to leaning in further to the digital opportunity. So now, with that, it's my pleasure, and we were going to invite them up after this presentation, but it's my pleasure to welcome Adrian and Wei to the panel, and I've got a few questions for us to dive into, but let's make them please feel welcome. Okay, Wei, I'll start with you because you led the research here, and I think there's a great opportunity for us to dive a little deeper into the content. And the first thing that was quite interesting is that when we think about change and business size, generally speaking, we always have this assumption that large businesses move slower, right? But actually, in the case of digital payments, the survey suggests the opposite. And so, keen to get your insight into why you think that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thanks for bringing up that question. Actually, indeed, a lot of the existing studies, when you look into actually digital payment, are usually associated with smaller business. So there's a lot of case studies about how digital payment is enabling small business to actually become more competitive, particularly in the developing country, right? But in our study, actually, what it's been showing is that actually is the large business, medium and larger business, have a higher adoption rate of the new forms of digital payments. And this show up quite clearly in our survey results. I think one of the reasons is, of course, the initial cost is a very major concern, right? So larger business would have more resources and capabilities to invest in digital payment. But I think two of the other findings coming from the research that are interesting is that we find that there are two areas where large business and small business have differences in terms of their perception and experience with digital payment. One of the areas is related to how digital payment is linked to the whole digital transformation journey. So we actually found that for large business, a much higher proportion of the large business believe that digital payment is crucial to their digital transformation journey. So in fact, a striking 81% of the survey, large business believe that this is a crucial piece in their digital transformation journey. So this is where we're seeing that a large business will see that digital payment would help them to streamline a lot of the operations that they have, and that could be actually happening across multiple countries. And the other thing is, of course, large business would have higher volume of transactions as well, where digital payment comes in and would help them to really actually optimize their transactions in a much more seamless way. The second areas of difference is really about that benefits side of the digital payment that coming from the survey, that we see that quite clearly large business stated that a much higher proportion of the large business stated that they seen that adopting digital payment actually help them to improve their competitiveness. Yeah, so these are based on companies that have adopted digital payment over the last new forms of digital payments over the last 3 years. So when they're actually looking into the outcome, the benefits of that adoption, actually much higher proportion of the large business actually seeing that this is in fact improving their competitiveness. Yeah, so I think the two areas, one is on a strategic side, more seeing digital payment as a crucial piece of the digital transformation. On the actual outcome side, where obviously a lot of large businesses have adopted, new forms of digital payment over the last 3 years, and they are able to report that they're seeing this is actually helping them to improve competitiveness, and that would explain, some of the reasons behind why we're seeing these results.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of large businesses. You can see that the opportunity proportionally is bigger for a large business, probably because they've got a larger capture market share, but also you could suggest it might be harder for them to do the change as well. Do you have any insights or examples of maybe either where that's gone well, or maybe who's undertook something from a large digital change perspective?
Yeah, so part of the research we did also includes some of the case studies, actually involve interviews with some of the early adopters of new forms of digital payment. So I think one of the examples is actually Atlassian, that we all know that is very well-known, digital companies. And I think through our conversation with them, one of the things was coming out is actually how complex their operation is, as a digital company that is not just focusing one country, but actually have multiple operations around the world. And through that discussion, the case come out quite clearly that for a large company like Atlassian, how digital payment is actually enable them to streamline their subscriptions across multiple countries. What is quite interesting to me is the innovation in this space as well, because they also talk about how they're able to customize their pricing models through digital payment technologies, actually that they could have tailor-made pricing models for different geographies and different parts of the world in terms of different markets. So I think that was a clear case in terms of, even though for large companies, it is much slower to adopt new technologies, but I think when it comes into a strategic consideration about how important it is, when you look into the benefits of actually adopting digital payment, and I think it becomes quite a clear case that it actually is quite an attractive solution to them.
Thank you, Wei. Adrian, Mr. Yum. I am a prolific user of Mr. Yum. I love how you've taken the concept of a digital experience in the physical world and fundamentally created something very unique and now, kicking goals at a global level. So very keen to get your view, because in the report, there's a suggestion that hospitality businesses tend to be slow at adopting digital technology. However, you've definitely bucked the trend there and, if anything, redefined a market. What role does digital payments play at Mr. Yum, and how does it help you achieve your business goals?
Thanks, Carl. Good to be here. I wasn't super surprised to see that data in the report. I think if you look at the digitisation of retail, with businesses like Shopify and Stripe powering that for so long, it's probably a decade ahead of hospitality in terms of e-commerce and payments and whatnot, right? So it is new, and people probably warned against us getting into this space when we first started the business nearly 5 years ago now, because it can be a slog doing tech with restaurants. So when we started nearly 5 years ago, and we'd noticed two insights to kick off, which was one was Eastern and one was a Western insight. So in the East, we'd seen in China WeChat absolutely take over with payments in restaurants and paying the bill or ordering to such a crazy level at mass market that hadn't extended into Western culture yet. And then in Western culture, there was the Instagram culture of consumers getting tired of paper menus and starting to use Instagram as like a hacky version of a menu. So we thought the combination of those two things, the design of Instagram, but then this payments approach from that was happening with WeChat, was a solid idea. And we made the bet that that idea would work and that hospitality would embrace payments fast enough before we died. That was the bet that we were making at the start. And we nearly died a couple of times. So yeah, whilst they are behind, we saw that this other research from the Great Report about even though the industry might be a bit behind, Australians, the way that the consumer adopts payments here, I think has always been an accelerator for the business. So even though it might be a bit slower for industry, this movement from the consumer and their expectation here has really enabled us to get enough big brands often going in the industry, and then restaurants tend to copy each other and adopt afterwards. So yeah, and if you compare this to the US, where we're also there, we've got a team in Austin. They're printing out the checks. You're still doing maths when you're like half cut, trying to figure out what the tips will be, writing it twice and signing it and whatnot. So I think we're doing a pretty good job here in Australia.
I think it's a strategy actually to get a little bit of a higher tip.
Yeah, they put the pressure on you. They kind of lean over you
exactly.
and look you in the eye to try and drive that tip up. So yeah, the industry's really come a long way, I think, here and now. Now it's in terms of ordering and paying at the table outside of China, the example I used at the start, Australia is for sure the highest adopting country in our category.
Yeah, and you just think about the consumer education. I think that I remember the first time I came across your technology, and I remember thinking, wow, it's interesting. And the reason I used it was I was just interested in it. I'm like, how does this work? And there's a QR code and a puck, and I downloaded the app, and now it's just the way, right? So it's been quite interesting to see how well consumers have picked up on the technology and be able to use it. Like, there's no education. It's been quite prolific.
Yeah.
So congratulations on amazing business model.
Thanks, Carl.
Ways. So macroeconomic uncertainty. And so like I talked to that a little bit, and we heard that also in the opening address as well, and the evolving payments landscape. How can companies develop strategies to benefit from payments digital adoption?
Yeah, so yeah, indeed, I think Carl has mentioned about, some of the surveys showing that over half of the survey business actually seeing that late payment is threatening their survival. So I think that macroeconomic uncertainty certainly have impacted the way that business operates. But I think the message here is that when there's a crisis, there's always an opportunity. And I think from our research, what we can see actually is 3 areas of strategic thinking that would help business to cope with the uncertainty. The first thing I think is to focus on consumer needs and consumer demands. Well, we have seen that, yes, the consumer has actually moved quite forward in terms of what they want to engage with new forms of digital payment. But for the Australian business, I think they're still actually quite lagging behind. So a lot of the Australian business predominantly still using traditional forms of payment systems. I mean, Adrian was talking about check. I think I look into our data, 20% of the Australian business still accept check as one of the payment methods. So we're not much more advanced in that perspective. But I think that's just showing there's a big gap between what consumer wants and what business is doing, right? So that will mean that there's a lot of needs to actually come into this space to bridge the gap. I think the second element of that strategic piece will be actually involves fraud and scam. That's something that we have talked about so much in the morning already. I think through what we have found in the research is also that that fraud and scam is more than just a process and a compliance. We had an amazing case study of a company called Sando. So basically the way that they do it is to build that fraud and scam deep into the fabric of the business model of the company, actually enable further expansion into the international market. I think the third piece of it is really coming from the research is about offer and manage multiple payment methods. So what it comes out from our research is that, we've seen that revolution is happening in Asia and other markets, and it's really disruptive. But in Australia, we've seen this revolution as a very gradual revolution. So what it means is that businesses are actually taking on new forms of digital payment methods, bits by bits, incrementally. So one of the things was quite interesting is that around 46% of the business that we interview, they are managing more than 4 different type of payment methods simultaneously. And there was about 20% of the business we surveyed, they're managing 6 or more type of payment methods simultaneously. So I think integration is something as a challenge, but it's also opportunities because we're seeing this is a gradual way of revolution. So that will means, it requires business really to think about the complexity of managing multiple systems, but also integrating different systems in a smart way. So I think that will be the last bit of advice that I will have on the strategy side.
Great. I think that's a big part of our value proposition. And every time I have to write a check, I panic, thinking I'm getting it wrong. I know we haven't got a lot of time left, but I do want to just come to you, Adrian. In the survey, we talked about mobile payments, the concept of tap to pay, and I know that you guys are a beta user of tap to pay, and so we'd just love to get your insight into what motivated you to move quickly with that and become one of our beta users.
For sure, thank you. Really excited to be launching that soon with you. I think the restaurant categories are very broad in the different service models that they've got. So when we first started, the obvious use case was ordering and paying at a pub, where you typically have to line up at the counter. So getting food and drinks, like your beer delivered to your table, was pretty magical because it was additive to the service. But then you run out of pubs at some point. Like a lot of pubs are doing this now. So started moving into casual restaurants that were comfortable with having this style of service. But we need to keep innovating and credit to Stripe because you always help us do our crazy ideas. So we need to keep finding ways of adapting to different service models and innovating on that. And the servers are a really key part of this in the restaurant industry. If we're a technology that replaces them and makes them redundant, we can't succeed. So we need to find this way of working with the industry and creating tools for them. So the timing was perfect when Stripe and Apple reached out about Tap to Pay because we'd just built a staff app called Crew, which was there to engage with the staff, help them manage their operation on the fly. And this was because many of them were saying that they were tired of using tablets in the restaurant to operate. So we built that, and we were really interested in how that could turn into payments. And then you reached out at that time, your team. So we see this as just the next step of more tools that help the restaurants to serve their guests and being able to take an order and upsell tableside. Do you want a bunch of oysters? Do you want a bottle of Prosecco while you're tableside? And being able to take the payment on the spot is going to be a game changer for them.
It's wonderful to see you continue to innovate. It's an absolute privilege to be a partner in seeing you do that journey. And so, again, thank you for that partnership and congratulations on a great business model. I think we're now out of time. We've got loads of questions, but we've kind of run out. And so, firstly, thank you to both our panellists for some incredible insights. Everyone, if we can please thank them. And if there are any follow-up questions, please do join us at the Stripe coffee cart after this or in the break. Thanks so much, everyone.